Hi, my name's Greg Turner, and I'm a systems engineer mostly based out here in Boulder, Colorado. For a good long while, I guess you could say I thought I knew who had my back, especially in my professional life. I poured everything I had into my work, truly believing that if you stayed loyal, if you did your job well, there'd always be a place for you. I gave 12 years of my life, my energy, my best ideas, to a company I helped build from the ground up. And in return, I got a 7-minute Zoom call. That day, I lost my job. But what I didn't realize then, in that moment of quiet shock, was that I never really owned it to begin with. It was a hard lesson, one that hit me right where I lived. And if you've ever been pushed out of something you gave your heart to, something you believed in, well, stick around till the end. Because this story isn't just about losing something precious. It's about how to rise, how to rebuild, completely on your own terms. What happened next? Well, I never saw it coming, not really. But looking back, maybe it was exactly what needed to happen. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were usually my busiest day, packed with technical reviews and strategy sessions. My calendar alert popped up, meeting with Miranda Keene. Miranda was the new CEO, brought in after Titanicorp acquired us, Voltara Systems. I hadn't had much direct interaction with her yet, just a couple of town halls where she spoke a lot about synergy and streamlining. Corporate speak, you know? The kind that usually means someone's about to lose their job. I just never thought it would be me. I clicked the Zoom link a minute early. My home office was the same as always, shelves packed with technical manuals, a couple of framed photos of my daughter, a slightly wilting plant I kept forgetting to water. Miranda's image appeared, perfectly framed, her background a tasteful, blurred office. She had this polished look. Everything about her seemed calculated. "Greg, thank you for joining," she said, her voice smooth, almost pre-recorded. There was no small talk, no easing into it. "Of course, Miranda. What's on your mind?" I tried to sound casual, like this was just another check-in, but there was a knot forming in my stomach. It's funny, the little physical tells your body gives you before your brain fully catches up. She looked down at her notes, or maybe just pretended to. "Greg, as you know, Titanicorp is focused on integrating Voltaris and optimizing our operational structure." Optimized. Another one of those words. After a careful review of our leadership needs moving forward, we've made the difficult decision that your role as Chief Technical Officer is no longer aligned with our future direction. No longer aligned. 12 years. 12 years of late nights, of weekends sacrificed, of pouring my soul into building Voltaris' tech infrastructure from a handful of servers in a dusty back room to a robust, scalable system that powered renewable energy projects across the country. 12 years distilled into that one sterile phrase. I stared at her image on the screen. My mind went blank for a second. It was like hearing a sentence in a foreign language. It took a moment for the meaning to actually land. Sucker punch. That's what it felt like. A quiet, polite, professionally delivered sucker punch. "I see," I said. My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. What else could I say? Argue? Plead? That wasn't me. And honestly, looking at her composed expression, I knew it wouldn't make a damn bit of difference. The decision was made. This call was a formality, a box to be checked on her HR to-do list. "We appreciate your contributions to Voltaris, Greg," she continued, her tone unchanged. "Your separation package details will be sent over by HR later today. It includes 3 months severance and your accrued vacation time. We'll also offer outplacement services." 3 months, for 12 years, felt insulting, but I just nodded. I remember focusing on a loose thread on the cuff of my shirt, trying to keep my composure. Inside, though, something was definitely breaking. It wasn't just about the job, the title, the money. It was the betrayal. The feeling of being discarded like an old piece of equipment. The belief I'd clung to for so long that loyalty and hard work would be rewarded, would offer protection, that belief was shattering piece by piece, right there in that 7-minute call. Because that's all it was. 7 minutes. She wrapped it up with some platitude about wishing me the best in my future endeavors. "Thank you, Miranda," I managed to say. I even forced a slight, professional nod. The call ended. Her image vanished from my screen, replaced by my own reflection. I looked hollow. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the blank monitor. The silence in my office was deafening. The plant still drooped. My daughter still smiled from the frame, but everything felt different. The foundation I'd built my professional life on had just crumbled beneath me. And the worst part? I never even saw the wrecking ball coming. Or maybe I had, and I just refused to believe it. That phrase, "no longer aligned," it just echoed in my head. It was such a cold, impersonal way to end things. It made me think of all the times I had aligned myself, bent myself, stretched myself for Voltaris. I remember the early days so vividly. Voltaris wasn't this shiny, acquired entity back then. It was just an idea, a dream really cooked up by Robert Ellison. Robert was an old-school engineer, a visionary in renewable energy. He had this infectious passion. He recruited me when I was just a senior engineer at a larger, stuffier corporation. He saw something in me, he said, a builder. We started in a cramped office space, the kind where the coffee machine was always on the fritz and the heating was temperamental. But none of that mattered. We were fueled by enthusiasm, by the belief that we were doing something important. I was his first technical hire, essentially. We built the initial systems together. I remember nights, so many nights, spent staring at lines of code, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the sheer determination to make things work. Robert would be there too, maybe not coding, but talking through problems, sketching out ideas on a whiteboard until 3 in the morning. There was this camaraderie, this sense that we were all in it together, building something from scratch. My daughter, Emily, was little then. I missed her 5th birthday party. I still feel a pang of guilt about that. We were in the middle of a critical system launch, a solar farm integration that was make or break for us. I was at the office for 36 hours straight, troubleshooting, testing, retesting. When I finally got home, exhausted but exhilarated because we'd pulled it off, the party was long over. Emily was asleep. My ex-wife, Sarah, well, that was one of many cracks that eventually led to our divorce. She'd said, "You love that company more than your family, Greg." At the time, I denied it vehemently. But looking back, sitting there in my silent office after Miranda's call, I wondered if she'd been right. I had poured so much of myself into Voltaris, maybe too much. It had become my identity, my purpose, especially after the divorce. It was the place where I felt competent, valued, essential. Robert always made me feel that way. He wasn't just a boss, he was a mentor. He trusted my judgment, gave me autonomy. We argued, sure, but always respectfully. We pushed each other, and we built something incredible. Voltaris grew steadily, organically. We landed bigger clients, hired more people. I became CTO, responsible for the entire technical backbone of the company. It was demanding, relentless, but deeply satisfying. Then, about 3 years ago, Robert got sick. It was a progressive neurological condition, something that slowly chipped away at his ability to run the company he loved. It was heartbreaking to watch. He fought it for as long as he could, but eventually he had to step down. He handed the reins to his son, Max Ellison. Max was different. He had an MBA from a fancy school, a Rolodex full of investor contacts, and a very different vision for Voltaris. Robert built for legacy, for impact. Max, from day one, seemed to be building for an exit. He talked about scaling rapidly, maximizing shareholder value, strategic partnerships. The language changed. The culture started to shift. It wasn't overnight. It was more like a slow erosion. The late-night brainstorming sessions became formal board meetings. The passionate debates about technical architecture were replaced by presentations on market positioning. I tried to adapt. I told myself this was just the natural evolution of a successful startup. But it felt transactional. The soul of the company, that fire Robert had ignited, it seemed to be dimming. Max was smart, I'll give him that. He positioned Voltaris perfectly for acquisition. And then Titanicorp came along, a massive, faceless conglomerate in the energy sector. They saw our renewable tech as a good addition to their portfolio, a bit of greenwashing, maybe. The acquisition was announced, and there were a lot of promises made. Business as usual, exciting new opportunities, investment in growth. Robert, from his retirement, had expressed concerns, quietly, to me. He worried Titanicorp wouldn't understand the nuance, the mission. He worried they'd just strip it for parts. I tried to reassure him, and maybe myself, that my team and I could safeguard what we'd built, that the core technology was too valuable to dismantle. But now, sitting there, after that 7-minute call, I realized Robert had been right. I had been naive. The company I'd dedicated 12 years to, the place that felt like home for so long, it wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a while, if I was truly honest with myself. It had become just another asset on a balance sheet, and I, apparently, was just another line item to be optimized. The nostalgia for those early days, the pain of watching something meaningful slowly morph into something purely commercial, it all washed over me. It wasn't just losing a job. It was like grieving a death, the death of an ideal, of a dream. And the quiet, steady hum of my computer, once a comforting sound, now seemed to mock me. The days that followed that call were a blur. HR sent the paperwork. It was all very efficient, cold. I signed what I needed to sign. I packed up the few personal items I still had at the physical office, though I'd been mostly remote since the acquisition. Felt strange walking through those halls as an outsider. People I'd worked with for years, some avoided eye contact, others offered quick, awkward sympathies. I understood. No one wants to be seen talking to the guy who just got axed, especially when there's a new regime in charge. It's human nature, I guess. Self-preservation. I tried to maintain a routine. Woke up at the same time, made coffee, sat at my desk. But instead of diving into system architecture diagrams or code reviews, I was staring at job boards, updating my resume. Felt deflating. After being a CTO, a leader, the idea of just being another applicant, another resume in a pile, was a tough pill to swallow. My severance would last a few months, but the financial cushion wasn't my main concern. It was the void, the loss of purpose. I'm not good at sitting still. My mind needs problems to solve, systems to build. And now, there was nothing. About a week after the layoff, I was clearing out my old work email, forwarding some personal contacts, deleting junk, when I saw it. An email sent about 2 days before my dismissal. The subject line was innocuous: Project Phoenix Phase 2 Planning. It was from Miranda Keene, addressed to Max Ellison and a few other Titanicorp executives I didn't recognize. It must have been misdirected to an old internal leadership distribution list I was still on by mistake, or maybe their IT hadn't been as quick to cut my access as Miranda had been to cut my job. Curiosity, or maybe just a dull sense of needing to understand, made me open it. My blood ran cold as I read. It was a thread discussing the restructuring of Voltaris technical leadership. My name was there, plain as day. Greg Turner, assess for immediate replacement. Legacy mindset not compatible with Titanicorp's agile innovation strategy. There was more. Details about transitioning my responsibilities, about identifying a more cost-effective, forward-thinking candidate. They were already interviewing people for my job before they even told me I was out. The anger, which had been a dull ache, flared into something hot and sharp. Legacy mindset? I built the damn legacy they were now profiting from. Cost-effective? Was that all I was? A salary figure to be minimized? The betrayal felt profound. It wasn't just a business decision. This email made it feel personal, calculated, and incredibly disrespectful. My first instinct was to fire off an angry reply, to call Max, who I'd known for years, who I'd tried to support even when I disagreed with his direction, to tell Miranda exactly what I thought of her agile innovation strategy. But then, I stopped. What would that accomplish? A moment of catharsis, maybe, but it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't give me my job back. It wouldn't undo the disrespect. It would just make me look bitter, emotional. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the email, and a different thought began to form, a tiny ember in the ashes of my anger. For years, I'd had this side project, a set of ideas I'd been tinkering with in my spare time. Concepts for a new kind of energy management platform, more efficient, more adaptable than anything Voltaris or even Titanicorp was currently using. It was always a someday project, something I'd get to if I ever had the time. Well, now I had the time. I minimized the email. I didn't delete it, though. I saved it. Then, I navigated to a folder on my personal hard drive, one I hadn't opened in months. It was labeled simply Altura.
Altura Technologies.
That was the name I'd idly come up with for this dream company, this someday project. Inside were scattered notes, some rough architectural sketches, a few lines of proof-of-concept code. Not much, but it was a start. I opened a new document in that folder, and I started to write. Not an angry email, a business plan. The anger was still there. Oh yeah, it was definitely there. But instead of letting it consume me, I decided to channel it. Let it be fuel. Miranda Keene and Max Ellison thought I was legacy? Obsolete? Fine. Let them think that. While they were busy streamlining and optimizing, I would build. It wasn't about revenge. Not in the shouting, screaming, burn-it-all-down sense. It was quieter than that, more strategic. If they thought I was no longer aligned, then maybe it was time I aligned with myself, with my own vision. That misdirected email, as insulting as it was, had done something unexpected. It had shaken me out of my stupor. It had flipped a switch. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I wasn't just a victim of a corporate takedown anymore. I was a builder, and it was time to get to work. The first few weeks working on Altura were intense. It was just me, my laptop, and a whole lot of coffee. I fleshed out the technical architecture, refined the core algorithms I'd been noodling on. The more I worked, the more excited I got. This wasn't just a rehash of what Voltaris did. It was a leap forward. It was designed for the complexities of the modern grid, for integrating diverse renewable sources seamlessly, for a level of predictive analytics that was, frankly, years ahead of what Titanicorp was peddling. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. Building a company, especially a tech company, takes a team, and I knew exactly who I needed. The email from Miranda had mentioned restructuring technical leadership, which I took to mean I probably wasn't the only one from the original Voltaris team on the chopping block, or at least made to feel redundant. One by one, I started getting calls. First, it was David, my lead architect at Voltaris, a brilliant, slightly eccentric guy who could make systems sing. He'd been reassigned to a deadened project, effectively sidelined. Then Lena, our top data scientist, who told me her innovative projects were being defunded in favor of Titanicorp's clunkier, off-the-shelf solutions. Mark, our infrastructure guru, was next. He'd quit in frustration after his proposals for upgrading critical systems were repeatedly ignored. Then another and another. In total, 5 key members of my old Voltaris technical team reached out, all feeling disillusioned, disrespected, or pushed out by the new regime. I invited them over to my house. My kitchen, which had seen its fair share of my solitary, slightly depressing meals lately, suddenly felt alive again. We crowded around my big wooden table, the one usually covered in Emily's homework or my scattered papers. I dragged in a large whiteboard from my garage, a relic from Voltaris's early startup days that I'd somehow ended up with. I laid out my vision for Altura Technologies. I didn't pull any punches about the risks. We'd be starting from scratch. No funding, no clients, just an idea and our collective expertise. Titanicorp was a behemoth. We'd be a gnat by comparison. There was a mix of excitement and apprehension in the room. These were people with mortgages, families, careers to think about. They'd all been burned by Voltaris's acquisition. Trusting another startup, another dream, wasn't going to be an easy sell. Sarah Chun, a younger software engineer, one of the brightest talents I'd recruited to Voltaris a couple of years back, was the most openly skeptical. She was sharp, practical, and hadn't been through the romantic early days of Voltaris like David or I had. She'd only known the more corporate version, and now the Titanicorp takeover. "Greg, with all due respect," she said, tapping her pen on her notepad. "This sounds great on a whiteboard, but Titanicorp has endless resources. They have the market share. How do we even begin to compete? What's our actual edge, beyond just being not Titanicorp?" It was a fair question, a necessary one, and I was glad she asked it. This couldn't be built on just resentment or nostalgia. It had to be built on solid technical and strategic ground. I took a deep breath. This was it. This was my leadership moment, not as a CTO with a corporate safety net, but as a founder trying to inspire a team. "You're right, Sarah," I said, looking her in the eye. "Titanicorp is big, but they're also slow. They're bureaucratic. Their core technology, the stuff they're trying to force onto Keystone Grid and other big clients, it's outdated. It's a patchwork of legacy systems from their other acquisitions. It's not designed for the kind of dynamic, decentralized energy landscape we're moving into." I turned to the whiteboard and started sketching. Fast. "What we're building with Altura," I explained, diving into the specifics of our predictive analytics engine, our AI-driven load balancing, our inherently more secure and scalable microservices architecture, is fundamentally different. It's not just an iteration. It's a new paradigm. We can offer clients greater efficiency, better reliability, and significantly lower integration costs, especially for complex renewable portfolios. Titanicorp is trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We're building the round hole. I talked about our potential niche, starting with mid-sized renewable operators who were being ignored or poorly served by the giants, then scaling up. I talked about building a company culture that valued innovation and respect, the kind of place we'd all wanted Voltaris to remain. I didn't try to sugarcoat the challenges. "It's going to be incredibly hard work," I admitted. "There's no guarantee of success, but I believe in this technology. And more importantly," I looked around the table at each of them, "I believe in us. We built Voltaris's technical success once. We can do it again, and this time we can do it our way for ourselves." There was a long silence after I finished. David was nodding slowly, a thoughtful look on his face. Lena was sketching something on her own notepad, a small smile playing on her lips. Mark just looked intrigued. Sarah was still watching me, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, she finally said, Okay, Greg, The tech is compelling. If we can actually pull this off. She paused. Then a small, determined smile broke through. All right, I'm in. But you owe me a lot of good coffee. A wave of relief and something like quiet joy washed over me. One by one, the others voiced their commitment. David, Lena, Mark, and the two others, Paul and Maria. It wasn't a cheer, not a loud celebration. It was more a quiet, resolute agreement, a shared understanding. We were a team again. My kitchen, just hours before a symbol of my isolation, now felt like a war room, a launch pad. The whiteboard was covered in diagrams, questions, ideas. The energy was back. Hope, tentative but real, was in the air. We knew the odds were long, but looking at their faces, at the talent and determination around that table, I felt, for the first time since that 7-minute Zoom call, truly optimistic. We had a mission. We had a team. Altura Technologies was no longer just a file on my hard drive. It was starting to breathe. We worked relentlessly over the next few months. My house became our unofficial headquarters. We coded, we designed, we debated. We were bootstrapping completely. Everyone was working for equity, for the belief in what we were building. Some were burning through savings, others picking up freelance gigs to stay afloat. The sacrifices were real, but the energy was infectious. It felt like the early days of Voltaris, but with a crucial difference. This time it was ours. Then, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Robert Ellison. Greg? It's Robert. Can you talk? His voice was weaker than I remembered, a little slurred, but the familiar warmth was still there. Robert, of course. It's great to hear from you. How are you doing? I felt a rush of affection and also concern. I hadn't spoken to him directly since well before the Titanicorp acquisition finalized. Oh, Greg, one day at a time, he said, a touch of weariness in his voice. But that's not why I called. I've been hearing things, whispers, about Titanicorp, about what they're doing with my company. The pain in that last phrase was palpable. What kind of things, Robert? I asked, my gut tightening. They're pushing Keystone Grid onto Titanicorp's old platform, aren't they? Keystone Grid was Voltaris's flagship client, one of the largest independent renewable energy operators in the region. We'd spent years developing a bespoke, highly integrated system for them. It was a jewel in Voltaris's crown. I believe so, Robert, I confirmed. That was the plan when I left. Miranda Keene was very focused on standardizing all major clients on the Titanicorp tech stack. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. Greg, that system, it's a dinosaur. It can't handle the kind of dynamic load balancing and distributed generation that Keystone relies on. Not without a massive, and I mean massive and risky, overhaul. They came to me, some of the old Keystone engineers, quietly. They're worried. Titanicorp is telling them it'll be a smooth transition, but they're seeing the specs. They're seeing the shortcuts Titanicorp is trying to take to meet an aggressive timeline set by Max. Of course. Max would be pushing for quick, visible wins to justify the acquisition to Titanicorp's board. Robert continued, his voice low and urgent. If that integration fails, Greg, it won't just be an inconvenience. Keystone manages power for critical infrastructure in 3 states. Hospitals, emergency services. A major failure could be catastrophic. Blackouts. Worse. A chill went down my spine. He wasn't being alarmist. I knew Keystone's operational complexity. I knew Titanicorp's aging platform. Robert was right. It was a disaster waiting to happen. What I'm hearing, Robert said, his voice dropping even lower. is that they're planning to force the full cutover in about 6 weeks. They're under pressure, and they're cutting corners on testing, on redundancy. Max is pushing it through, apparently over the objections of some of his own newly inherited engineers from Voltaris, and even some warnings from the Titanicorp old guard who know the limitations of their own system. 6 weeks. My mind raced. Altura's core platform was close. We had a working prototype, a robust beta. It wasn't fully productized for a massive client like Keystone. Not yet. But the core engine, the intelligence, it was there. It was solid. Robert, I said slowly, an idea forming, audacious and terrifying. What if there was an alternative? A lifeboat, so to speak? There was a pause. Then Robert's voice with a new edge of interest. What are you thinking, Greg? I told him about Altura, about the team I'd reassembled, about the technology we were building. I didn't overpromise, but I laid out our capabilities. He listened patiently, asking sharp, insightful questions, his engineer's mind still clearly at work despite his illness. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Greg, if what you're saying is true, if your system can do what you claim, you need to be ready. Not just ready with the tech, ready to move fast. Because if Titanicorp fumbles this Keystone integration, and I have a terrible feeling they will, Keystone will be desperate. They'll need a solution yesterday, and they won't have time for Titanicorp to fix its own mess. His words hung in the air. It was an enormous gamble. Could we, a tiny, unfunded startup, really step in and save a massive client from the fallout of a corporate giant's screw-up? The thought was daunting. But then I thought about Keystone's engineers worried. I thought about the potential consequences Robert had outlined. And I thought about Miranda Keene's smug dismissal, Max's transactional approach. We'll be ready, Robert, I said. A new sense of urgency, of almost dangerous purpose, solidifying within me. Thank you for the heads up, for everything. Just do it right, Greg, he said, his voice full of a strange mix of hope and weariness. Build it the right way, for the right reasons. After I hung up, I called an emergency meeting with the Altura team. I laid out what Robert had told me. The risks, the timeline, the almost insane opportunity. The atmosphere in my kitchen was electric. Fear, excitement, disbelief. 6 weeks, Sarah said, her eyes wide. To get from beta to something that could handle Keystone? Greg, that's almost impossible. Almost, I agreed. But look, we don't need to replace their entire system overnight. We need a failsafe, a way to stabilize their core operations if Titanicorp's integration goes sideways. We focus on the critical path. Load balancing, grid stability, and emergency control interface. Can we build that? Can we make it robust enough to be a credible alternative in a crisis? David, Lena, Mark, Paul, Maria. They started talking, sketching, arguing, ideas flying. The doubt was still there, but it was being overridden by the sheer audacity of the challenge. The adrenaline was palpable. This wasn't just about building a cool piece of tech anymore. This was about being a lifeline. This was about proving, in the most dramatic way possible, that we had something Titanicorp didn't. A truly superior solution, and the agility to deploy it when it mattered most. The next 6 weeks were a blur of round-the-clock work. My house was littered with empty coffee cups, pizza boxes, and whiteboards covered in frantic scribbles. Sleep was a luxury. We pushed ourselves and each other to the absolute limit. We were running on fumes and pure, unadulterated determination. We built the core modules, stress-tested them, broke them, fixed them, tested them again. We developed a rapid deployment protocol. We were building not just software, but a rescue mission. And all the while, in the back of my mind, Robert's words echoed. If they fumble this, Keystone will be desperate. The suspense was almost unbearable. We were building our lifeboat, hoping like hell we wouldn't need it, but knowing deep down that we probably would. The fate of Altura, and potentially the stability of a regional power grid, hung in the balance. It was the biggest gamble of my life. The call came on a Thursday morning. Not from Robert, but from a number I vaguely recognized as belonging to Alina Chong, the CEO of Keystone Grid. I'd met her a few times when I was still CTO at Voltaris during high-level strategy meetings. She was sharp, no-nonsense, and fiercely protective of her company's operational integrity. Greg Turner. Her voice was tight, stressed. Alina. Yes, what's going on? I tried to sound calm, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. It's a mess, Greg. A complete bloody mess. I could hear the strain, the barely suppressed panic. Titanicorp pushed through the system cutover last night. It's failing. We've got cascading faults, data corruption, our monitoring systems are going haywire. We're hours, maybe less, from major outages if we can't stabilize this. I closed my eyes for a brief second, took a deep breath. The Altura team, gathered in my living room, looked at me, their faces pale but intent. They knew. I understand, Alina, I said, my voice steady. We're ready. Ready? Ready for what? She asked, a hint of desperate hope in her tone. Robert Ellison gave me a heads-up about potential issues. My team and we've been working on an alternative. A contingency. A way to get your core systems back online, stable, using a more robust platform. There was a stunned silence on her end. Then, you have something now? Something that can help us now? Yes, I said. It's not a full replacement for everything Titanicorp promised. Not yet. But it's a lifeline. It can stabilize your grid operations, give you back control, and buy you time. Greg, if you're serious, I need to see it. Now, Titanicorp is scrambling, making excuses, but they don't have a fix. Max Ellison is, well, let's just say he's not inspiring confidence right now. The venom in her voice when she mentioned Max was unmistakable. I can be at your headquarters in an hour, I said. I have two things for you. One is a technical demonstration of our solution. The other is something your legal team might find very interesting. My office. 1 hour, she said and hung up. I looked at my team. All right, showtime. David grabbed the encrypted laptop with our live demo environment. Lena had compiled a concise technical brief, and I picked up 2 unassuming, identical black flash drives. One contained the core Altura deployment package and installation guide, our technological lifeboat. The other, that contained a detailed analysis I'd commissioned, very quietly, from a specialist legal firm. It laid out Titanicorp's contractual obligations to Keystone, highlighted the specific technical deficiencies of their platform that we anticipated would lead to this exact kind of failure, and outlined Keystone's grounds for breach of contract and potential liabilities Titanicorp now faced. It also included a copy of that misdirected email from Miranda Keene, the one about replacing legacy mindset leadership. Proof that they knew, or should have known, about the risks they were taking by sidelining experienced personnel and pushing an unproven integration. The meeting with Alina Chong was tense. Her operations center was in controlled chaos. Engineers were frantically trying to contain the damage. Max Ellison and a couple of Titanicorp executives were huddled in a corner, looking overwhelmed and defensive. They shot me a dark look as I was ushered past them into Alina's office. I didn't waste time. I laid it out clearly, concisely. David ran the demo, showcasing Altura's stability, its intuitive controls, its rapid diagnostic capabilities. Lena walked Alina through the technical specs, answering her sharp questions with calm precision. Then I handed Alina the 2 flash drives. "The first one," I said, tapping the drive on her desk, "is Altura. It's your immediate solution to stabilize your grid. My team can begin deployment within hours, working with your engineers. We can have your critical functions back online and stable within 24 to 48 hours. Her eyes, which had been filled with stress, now held a flicker of something else. Hope, consideration. "The second drive," I continued, placing it next to the first, "is for your legal counsel. It details Titanicorp's apparent negligence and breach of contract. It also suggests a path forward that protects Keystone's interests and ensures operational continuity." Alina picked up the second drive, turning it over in her fingers. She looked at me, a long, appraising look. "You came very prepared, Greg." "We believe in being prepared," I said simply. "We also believe in doing things the right way." I didn't mention Miranda or Max or my own dismissal. This wasn't about my personal grievance. Not in this room. This was about offering a solution to a critical problem. She was silent for a moment. Then, she picked up her phone. "Get our legal team in here and tell operations to stand by for a potential new deployment. I want a full proposal from Altura Technologies on my desk by end of day.
Urgent.
As I walked out of her office, past the still floundering Titanicorp team, I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. Just a quiet, intense satisfaction. The kind that comes from being ready when the moment arrives. Justice, or something like it, felt like it might just be turning a corner. We had opened a doorway. Now we just had to walk through it. The next few days were an absolute whirlwind. Keystone's legal team pored over the contents of that second flash drive. Their technical team grilled us on every aspect of Altura's platform. We worked side by side with Keystone's engineers, deploying our emergency stabilization package. It was grueling, high-stakes work, but our system performed flawlessly. Within 36 hours, Keystone's grid was stable. The immediate crisis was averted. Alina Chong was, to put it mildly, impressed. She was also furious with Titanicorp. The evidence of their negligence, combined with their catastrophic failure, was undeniable. Keystone formally declared Titanicorp in breach of contract and immediately initiated proceedings to terminate their agreement. And then, they formally requested a long-term, comprehensive proposal from Altura Technologies to become their primary energy management platform provider. It was the break we'd been working towards, dreaming about. The contract of a lifetime right out of the gate. Of course, Titanicorp didn't take it lying down. As soon as they got wind that Keystone was seriously considering Altura, a tiny, unknown startup founded by their recently ousted CTO, they went on the offensive. We received a cease and desist letter full of baseless accusations. Intellectual property theft, breach of non-compete clauses, which were dubious at best, given the circumstances of my dismissal, unfair competition. It was a classic corporate bullying tactic. All smoke and mirrors, designed to intimidate us and scare Keystone away. When the letter didn't work, Alina Chong was not easily intimidated. Titanicorp escalated. They filed a lawsuit, seeking an injunction to block Altura from signing any contract with Keystone. Their lawyers were a high-powered, expensive bunch from a big downtown firm. We were still operating out of my kitchen, represented by a sharp but much smaller firm that believed in our case. The preliminary hearing for the injunction was surreal. There I was, Greg Turner, the legacy mindset engineer, facing off against the legal might of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Miranda Keene was there in the courtroom, looking imperious. Max Ellison sat beside her, looking distinctly uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eye. Their lawyers argued that Altura was built on stolen Voltaris IP, that I had violated my fiduciary duties. It was all nonsense, and we had the documentation, the code repositories with timestamps, the sworn affidavits from my team to prove that Altura was an entirely new creation, built from the ground up after my departure from Voltaris. Our lawyer presented our case calmly, methodically. He highlighted Titanicorp's own failures with Keystone, the misdirected email from Miranda showing their intent to replace me even before any alleged wrongdoing, and the clear, independent innovation behind Altura. The judge, a stern, experienced woman who clearly had no patience for corporate gamesmanship, listened intently. She asked pointed questions of both sides. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Our entire future, everything we had worked for, hinged on her decision. If she granted the injunction, Altura would be dead in the water. Keystone couldn't wait months or years for a full trial. They needed a solution now. After hearing all the arguments, the judge leaned back in her chair. The silence stretched. I swear I could hear my own heartbeat. Then she spoke. Based on the evidence presented, she said, her voice ringing with authority, I find no credible basis for the plaintiff's claims of irreparable harm or likelihood of success on the merits regarding intellectual property theft or breach of fiduciary duty by Mr. Turner and Altura Technologies. The defendants appear to have developed an independent solution, and Keystone Grid has a clear and urgent need for a functioning system, which Titanicorp has demonstrably failed to provide. She looked directly at Titanicorp's legal team. The request for a preliminary injunction is denied. Denied. The word echoed in the courtroom. Denied. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. It felt like I'd been underwater for weeks, and I could finally break the surface and breathe. David, Sarah, Lena, who were all sitting behind me, let out quiet gasps and murmurs of elation. Miranda Keene's face was a mask of disbelief, then anger. Max just looked pale. Their lawyers started shuffling papers, already planning their next move, no doubt. But for now, we had one. The path was clear. Later that day, Alina Chong called. Heard the news, Greg. Congratulations. Send over the contract. Let's get this done. We signed the deal with Keystone Grid the following week. It was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. Altura Technologies, the little startup born out of betrayal and a misdirected email, had landed its first major client. Standing there, watching Alina sign, I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt vindicated. We hadn't stooped to their level. We hadn't engaged in mudslinging. We had simply built a better product, acted with integrity, and been ready when opportunity, disguised as a crisis, knocked. And that, I realized, was the best kind of victory. A silent, life-changing relief. We'd done it. The right way. 18 months. That's how long it's been since that chaotic week, since the courtroom, since signing the Keystone deal. 18 months, and Altura Technologies isn't operating out of my kitchen anymore. We have a proper office now, bright and open, filled with talented engineers, data scientists, and support staff, many of them folks who, like my initial team, found themselves adrift or undervalued in the wake of corporate shuffles elsewhere. We're thriving. The Keystone Grid implementation was a success, smoother and more effective than even we had dared to hope. Word got out. Other renewable energy operators, frustrated with the legacy systems and inflexible contracts offered by the giants, started calling. We've landed 3 more significant clients since then, and our pipeline is strong. We're growing steadily, sustainably. We're building a reputation not just for cutting-edge technology, but for being a true partner to our clients. And what about Titanicorp? Well, their lawsuit against us eventually fizzled out. They appealed the judge's denial of the injunction, of course, but it was a weak case, and after months of legal wrangling and mounting costs, they quietly dropped it. Their reputation in the renewable sector took a serious hit after the Keystone debacle. Miranda Keene, I heard through the grapevine, was reassigned within Titanicorp to a less prominent division, far from client-facing roles. A corporate euphemism for being put out to pasture.
Max Ellison.
He left Titanicorp a few months after the lawsuit failed. Last I heard, he'd exited the energy industry altogether. Perhaps he realized that just having an MBA and a famous last name wasn't enough when things got truly challenging. Robert Ellison visited our new offices a couple of months ago. His illness has progressed, and he's in a wheelchair now, his speech slower, but his eyes were bright with pride as I showed him around. He met the team, saw our systems in action, saw the buzz and energy in the room. He gripped my arm, his hand trembling slightly. "You did it, Greg," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You built it the right way, the way Voltaris was supposed to be." Coming from him, that meant more than any contract, any financial success. Sometimes, late in the evening, I'll stand out on my deck, looking at the sunset over the Rockies. The air here in Boulder is usually crisp and clean. I think back to that 7-minute Zoom call, to the anger and the feeling of betrayal. It's funny, it doesn't sting anymore. It's just a fact, a data point in my past. Being pushed out of Voltaris, out of what I thought was my life's work. It hurt. It hurt like hell. But it also forced me to clear away the debris of a belief that no longer served me, that loyalty to a corporation would somehow guarantee loyalty in return. I realize now that Voltaris, under Max and then Titanicorp, wasn't the right place for me anymore. Maybe it hadn't been for a while. Being pushed out, as painful as it was a gift. It was the catalyst I needed to build something new, something that truly aligned with my values, with my vision of how technology can serve a real purpose. Altura isn't just a company. It's a testament to what a small, dedicated team can achieve when they're driven by passion and integrity. We're not just building software, we're building a different kind of company. One where people are valued, where innovation is nurtured, and where we do right by our clients and our mission. Losing that job felt like an ending, but it wasn't. It was a beginning, a much harder, much scarier, but ultimately a much more rewarding one. I didn't own my job at Voltaris, but Altura? Altura is something I and my team truly own, and we built it brick by brick the right way. The day I was let go, that 7-minute call, I thought it was the end of a significant chapter, maybe the end of my meaningful career. I truly felt lost. Today, I know it wasn't an ending at all. It was the start of everything that truly mattered. It was the painful push I needed to step onto a path that was genuinely my own. I didn't sue for wrongful termination, though maybe I could have. I didn't vent my anger and frustration online, though the temptation was there. Believe me. Instead, I chose to rebuild quietly, steadily, focusing on creating something of real value, the right way. And somewhere along that challenging, often uncertain journey, I learned that real value, true worth, doesn't need to shout or beg to be seen. It shines on its own, especially when you stay true to your principles and your vision. So if you've ever been pushed out of something you loved, something you poured your heart into, just know this. Sometimes that painful severance, that unexpected door closing, is the only way to get you to start building something new, something that lasts, something that is truly yours. Have you ever turned a loss like that into a real turning point in your life? I genuinely love to hear about it. Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you saw a piece of yourself in this story, if it resonated with your own experiences, don't forget to subscribe to TK Revenge Story. Because those of us who've walked through the fire, we know how to recognize each other, and there's strength in sharing these journeys. You can also support the channel through Super Thanks. if you feel moved to do so. Sometimes giving in whatever form is part of the healing too. Thanks for listening.